is this going to be? Oh man, beautiful. This is the first time. This would be the third time that I've tried going live. And this is the first time that I won't have, shoot, I shouldn't jinx it yet. We're only 20 seconds in. This will be the first time that I haven't had to quit it, restart it, get a different connection so that I have good enough internet connection to do this. Because every other time, the last 2 weeks, it says go live and here I am, and then the screen just goes black and I don't see anything else. So we are making progress. This is beautiful. Thank you guys for tuning in for another weekly live Q&A. I got so much feedback on last week's, which was really, really cool. Some of it was not super positive, but it is what it is. And then some of it was really positive and really great follow-up questions. As always, if you guys have any questions at all, please feel free, if you're on here, to drop them in the chat. Or if you are watching this at a later time, drop it in the comments, and then hopefully I will be able to get to it the next week. And even if you are multiple weeks behind, it's okay. I still see the notifications for all of the comments, and I can add it to my list of questions. I have a whole bunch of them written out here. And then I do know that I have a few that are living in my phone from my question sticker that I threw up on my Instagram last night. So once I get through all of the written ones and then the ones on Instagram, that'll probably be the end of it. If anybody drops any in the chat, I will get to those as quickly as possible. And yeah, so I do want to preface this with the same thing that I prefaced last week with, I am not a cricket expert. All of the tips, tricks, thoughts, opinions come from all of the experience that I have in the last almost 4 years of raising the crickets. This is what has worked for me. This is what works for my setup. This may not work for you, depending on what you have for resources, depending on what part of the world you're in. I realize that all of the things I have are not necessarily available to everyone else, but hopefully some of the tips and tricks are something that you can apply wherever you are, whatever your setup is, and hopefully it helps move the ball forward for the entire industry. So with that, I have 6 questions written down. And then, like I said, I know I have a few living in my phone. So let's go ahead and do this, and we will see what happens. The first one, this one came off of my Facebook when I posted on my Facebook, is what is the shelf life of my product? I have found a few packages from an old order, and I want to know if they are okay. So the shelf life of my products, so my roasted crickets, is 1 year from manufacture. They have a resealable top, so even if it's open and you have it resealed up, they're probably fine. They are similar to chips in that if you were to leave them open or if there's any air that gets in there, they'll get stale. So they're probably they are still safe, but quality-wise, they might have declined slightly if there's any air that's seeping in. So 1 year for the roasted crickets. Same thing for the 100% cricket powder. You can extend that shelf life on the cricket powder and probably theoretically on the roasted crickets if you stick them in the freezer, store them in the freezer. So typically that's what I recommend people do with the cricket powder, is just store it in the freezer if you have the space. You can keep it sealed up and at room temperature. There's no problem there. But if you want to keep it fresher for longer, throw it in the freezer, let it live there. You could probably do the same in the fridge. Either would work. And then my cricket bars, they have a 10-month shelf life from manufacturer. So you have quite a while. As long as your last order was not 10 months or more ago, you should be all right on just about everything. And if you go ahead and flip over the package on all of my products, there is an expiration date on all of them. So that should help clue you in as well. And by expiration date, I mean a best by date. So again, you can eat them after, but you don't have to. All right. So second question actually came from my video that I uploaded last night that is all about breeding crickets. So many tips and tricks in there. Breeding crickets, like the actual breeding process, is probably the most asked topic that I get. It's where you can screw up the most, I think. But also, once you master the basics, it is the easiest part, in my opinion, to get the actual eggs out of the female and have them hatch. That becomes the easiest part of the entire process. It's once they've hatched, that's when things get hairy. But actually getting the crickets to do what they need to do to have fertilized eggs and have those fertilized eggs hatch, that's the easy part once you get the basics. So the question that came from that was, what does your farm smell like? And I'm actually really glad that this question got asked, because smell is one of the best indicators of a problem. Generally speaking, my farm smells like a warm version of the feed that we feed the crickets. So almost like a warm grain. There's a little bit of a fish smell in there because we use a feed that has fish meal in it. So there's an element of that, but kind of like warm grains. So like warm cereal or oatmeal or porridge or whatever you want to call it is sort of what it smells like. Now, if I walked into the barn and there was a very strong ammonia smell, or there was a very strong anything but like warm grain sort of smell, that will indicate that there is a problem. And then at that point, you just have to use your nose essentially to figure out what bin is the problem, what area of the barn is the problem. Smell is one of those very early indicators that you definitely need to pay attention to. Cricket barns should not smell. I always tell people when they walk into a pet store, if they can smell the crickets, it's like a really diseased smell, has a very distinct smell. Do not get crickets from there to feed your animals, because that's not a healthy animal that you are feeding your animal. Can't be good for them. So anytime that I walk in the barn and there's either a really strong ammonia smell, that is a very good indicator that we need to get some fresh air in there and circulating. Or even worse, if it smells like dead crickets, which is like a very distinct smell. You will know it when you smell it. You will know when there's a problem. That then indicates that we have an issue. Did it get too hot? Is it too humid? All of the things that can go wrong. Smell is the first indicator of that. So our farm, like I said, typically smells like warm cornflakes is a description I've heard. Some people have said it kind of smells like a chicken barn, but I would argue that it smells a lot better than a chicken barn. Chicken barns really stink. So yeah. Okay, this next question is a follow-up to one of the questions that I addressed last week, which was, can you eat insects as part of a keto diet? Like, are there keto-friendly insects, essentially? And I said, yes, but not crickets, because they're too high in protein. You need something that's higher fat, which is typically going to be a younger insect or a larval stage. Those tend to be higher fat because there's a lot of growth and metamorphosis that goes on, so those larvae need a lot of extra fat stores to continue growing. So the follow-up was, I don't want to be too much of a monster to the palm weevil larvae and cicada nymphs, which I plan to eat. Is there a humane way of killing them with the least amount of pain? So there's a few things in this question that are really interesting to think about, and from a moral standpoint is something that comes up fairly often in the insect entomophagy, eating insects world. And that is the question of morality and humane killing and humane treatment and pain sensing and everything that way. And like, how much of it are we just projecting our own humanity onto these insects, and how much of it do we really need to consider? So the way, I suppose I should talk about the way that we kill our crickets. Here at Jiminy Crickets, we freeze them. So our growers put them in the fridge first so that the crickets go dormant, and then once they get to our processing facility, they are frozen. There are other places that I know that boil them alive. That's a way to do it too. But we freeze ours first. So we freeze them and then boil them as part of the processing. So, but the interesting thing about insects is the jury is really still out on whether or not they feel pain. Insects react to things from a sensory standpoint, but just because they're sensory, that does not necessarily imply pain. With crickets and other insects being cold-blooded animals, they need external heat to keep their bodies warm. So because of that, they go dormant and then they die if it ends up too cold. Here in Iowa, this is what happens every winter for any insects that do not overwinter, is they end up going dormant and dying in the winter. So, but is that painful? I don't know if that's painful or not. And I don't think we really have a good way of figuring out and studying whether insects actually have pain receptors. They don't have very complex nerve systems. From my rudimentary understanding of insect anatomy, they do not have a single centralized nerve system. So think of us like the brain with, and all the nerves that go through us and everything, and the pain receptors. They do not have something similar to that. They have a nerve center that essentially controls each part of their, so you have head, thorax, and abdomen. So they have a nerve center in their head, they have a nerve center in their thorax, and they have a nerve center in their abdomen. So fun fact that I learned raising crickets, you can lose any of those sections and the rest of it will still function. So crickets are cannibals. They are jerks to each other. I have seen a cricket with only its top two legs and its head, and it's still running around. Can I definitively say that cricket is in pain? I don't know, but I do know that cricket will eventually die because it will eat things and there's nowhere for it to go. There's no processing happening. So that's not going to work. But do the insects actually feel pain? Again, I don't know. I don't know how you figure out the answer to that question. But for me, freezing them seems like a very natural, very humane thing to do. So that's the way I would recommend it. If you want to kind of put them to sleep before you freeze them, you could rinse them in cold water. That'll slow them down before you put them in the freezer. Think of kind of like putting them to sleep before you do it. Hope that helps. It's a very complex, very interesting, when you start going down that morality trail of what are we actually projecting? What are they actually feeling? How do we tell the difference? It becomes very complicated. So we do the best we can. And I think freezer is a good way to do it. Okay, question number 4. I keep getting mold in my cricket containers. Help, essentially. So now there's a lot more context that goes to this question because I had some follow-up questions to this person when they asked it. He is rearing a whole bunch of different feeder insects, like a whole bunch. In addition to, I think I'm reading into it right, of he's doing some live bait fish, so probably things like minnows and stuff like that. And they're all basically in the same room. So there's open water tanks. It's probably pretty warm. All sorts of things going on. Which leads me to believe, and follow-up question, I asked him if he knows what the humidity of that particular room is. He said he doesn't, which is fine. But just based off of the description of the rest of the stuff that's in the room, my guess is that the humidity is pretty dang high. So for majority of the life cycle, that's probably not a problem. But as your crickets get older, and particularly if you have a high population density, you are going to end up with a mold problem for sure. And then depending on what you're using for housing, most likely it's a paper-based product. So it'll either be egg cartons and egg flats or paper towel rolls, toilet paper rolls, whatever you have. All of those things are very, very dry by nature. And so they are hydrophilic, meaning they attract water and attract moisture. And so that attraction of water and moisture is going to make those soggy, which is then going to combine with your frass and everything else that you have in there. It's just going to create mold, which is going to create problems. So my suggestion on that is, if you can, if you have a way, if your setup is conducive to putting your crickets in a separate room that doesn't have a whole bunch of open water tanks, that's warm, that is probably goes in and you feel like you just stepped into a shower, that's going to prevent your mold. The other thing is maybe thinning out your population. If you cannot dedicate another room, maybe you need to thin your population so that you don't have as much excess moisture created by the crickets. But truthfully, what I would do is put them somewhere else, because it sounds like the humidity in the room that you have is probably too high. And this, again, I suppose another way of looking at it as well is whatever you're growing your tubs in, the other problem could be that you have a top on your tubs. Take that off. That might make all the difference. More fresh air, more ventilation. It could just be that you don't have enough ventilation for that particular tub. And so with the combination of the humidity of the room and the moisture produced by the crickets just living, you need more air exchange. So maybe if that is the case, take the top off. Question in the chat. Have you ever had a cricket quesadilla? So interesting. Friends there's a company called Pinole Blue out of Wichita, and they do blue corn tortillas. He's originally, his family's from Chihuahua, Mexico. And so he does some traditional Mexican dishes. So Pinole apparently is like a Mexican drink. I've never had it. Anyway, he did a live this past week with my crickets where he made a cricket quesadilla, and it looked really good. The closest thing that I've probably had to a cricket quesadilla is this summer. I don't know if you've ever heard of corn smut, is what we would call it here in Iowa. Huitlacoche is what they call it in Mexico, and it's a delicacy. Also called like the devil's corn is what we would call it here in the Midwest. I've never heard that. Or Mexican truffle. So basically, it's like this fungus that grows on an ear of corn. And down in Mexico is a delicacy. Up here in Iowa, anybody, if I said, hey, you can eat this, they'd be like, that is absolutely disgusting. There's no way I'm touching it. But I have a friend who is a chef who has tried to serve this to the people that she cooks for normally. And so when I saw an ear of it in our sweet corn this year, I was like, you know what, I'm going to try it. So I picked that, chopped it up, sauteed it with some onions and some peppers, threw a little cheese on a tortilla, and some hot and spicy crickets on top. So that was close to a cricket quesadilla. Really, really good. Highly suggest if you ever get the chance to try. I suppose they were corn smut tacos. I called them tacos, but similar. If you ever get the chance to try it, definitely try it out. It's delicious. It looks gross. I know it. And it very much has a stigma here in the Midwest of like something you definitely would never eat, but it was really, really good. And I don't normally like mushrooms, but it was really good. So if I see any more this year, I will definitely be doing that again. Okay. 5th question. How big can someone get growing crickets? Is demand growing? And is there a piece of the cake for everyone? So I'm really glad that this question got asked too, because it is if you are looking at getting into this industry and you're like, man, I feel like I'm too late. I feel like, there's people in this that they're just going to be too much of the market share. We are so early days. It is not too early at all, or too late at all, to be getting into this industry. We've barely even tapped into the absolute growth that we can do in this entire industry. I think the projections, I would venture to guess right now in 2021 that there's probably we're maybe 750 million worldwide as an industry, like US dollar equivalent revenues total, maybe $1 billion, but I doubt it. It's projected to be like 7 or 8 billion by 2030. That is a lot of growth. There is a lot of space for people to grow. There's a lot of space for new players. Everybody's not going to make it. Like, that's what happens in a new market, but it's definitely, everybody's still jockeying for position on who's going to take market share. And people who have what is perceived to be large market share right now, doesn't necessarily mean that that'll be the case in 10 years. Just because somebody is really good at raising money does not mean that they are necessarily going to survive. So I think there's definitely a piece for everybody. And there's still plenty of time. Demand is absolutely growing. But I do want to say that with an asterisk, like full disclosure, it is going to be a slow burn, particularly on the human consumption side. If you want to get into the feed market, that's a little bit different, but it's entirely different rules. It's entirely different regulations. It has its own hurdles. But in terms of human consumption, at least here in the West, in the US, it's growing, but it's not growing like breakneck speed like fake meats are. I would also say with that, though, I don't know if anybody saw the news that came out with Beyond Meat this week, that they're actually losing 20 cents per burger that they sell. Like, it's not economically sustainable. They took a massive hit on their stock prices and everything. So there's still things that are being worked out within the cricket industry to make sure that we don't go down the path of that. But there's still a ton of room. And like I said, it's going to be a slow burn. I think of it kind of like sushi. Sushi was not a thing in the 80s in the US. Like, it was one of those really fringy, out there. Most people thought it was totally gross. Now here in Ames, Iowa, we have 2 sushi restaurants. It's not like sushi country at all. So that's just a demonstration of how much that it has actually grown. Plenty of room. Short answer. Plenty of room. So if you're thinking about it, go for it. Start small. See what happens. You might hate it, but you never know till you try. All right. Oh, I have another one in the chat. Have you any advice for beginners who want to start farming in a mini greenhouse? Thanks. Greenhouses present a lot of challenges. You could do it on a small scale in a greenhouse, I think, but I can see a lot of challenges in a greenhouse. Your ability to control your climate in a greenhouse setup is hard. Because the sun with external heat, how do you keep it from getting too hot? Controlling your humidity. Most greenhouses I've been in are really, really humid. I think that's partly because of what's in the greenhouse and them transpiring. I think that's the word I'm looking for. Releasing, all the plants releasing moisture. The other big greenhouse I've been in is a fish farm, and so those are just open tanks. So obviously that's going to be quite humid. I worry about using a greenhouse for a larger scale or for a longer amount of time, because I think your ability to, the greenhouse is inside the house. Interesting. Okay. That you could work with then, probably. That you could work with. That makes it a little bit easier to control your environment. So that's my biggest recommendation is get the setup so where you can control the environment with your big 3 rocks of raising crickets, and that is heat, humidity, and air quality. So those are the 3 things that you need. You need to be able to control your overall temperature from top to bottom as best as possible. You need to be able to control your humidity. You can't have it too high, but you can't have it too low. Like, you need a happy medium, about 50%. Is pretty safe. You get too much higher than that and you're going to end up with a mold problem. Too much lower than that and your baby crickets are going to die all the time. And then your air quality. As the crickets grow, they are going to need an increased fresh air intake flow. Not as big a deal when they're small because they're tiny and they don't need a lot of air, a lot of fresh air, and they are not putting off a whole lot of gases at scale. But as they start to grow, that becomes a problem. So those are definitely the 3 things that I would look at. Interesting on the greenhouse inside of the house. So it can be done, definitely. But make sure you can control those 3 factors before you get too carried away. Hope that helps. And then the last question I have written down here before I will go on my Instagram ones, because I know, like I said, I have at least 2. What's a sick hack for avoiding contamination? Contamination as far as like diseased crickets coming in, or contamination as far as like what? If it's diseased crickets, your first bet is to make sure that you research wherever your breeding stock is coming from. 100% do not recommend, unless the pet store like has their own colony and you can like go in and verify how they are raising them. Don't get them from a pet store. If you have a local farm that you can go to and get them from, again, that you are confident in the way that they're reared and you are confident that they don't have a disease problem, that's where I would get them from first. Otherwise, depending on where you are, you can get them from someone who ships them online. The two that I like and have had really good experiences with, and they have a good reputation across the industry, are for Acada domesticus. I should do an asterisk with that. Are Armstrong Crickets and Fluker Farms. Those two have very healthy crickets. So those would be my recommendation for your breeding stock, because that's the most important. Who are you getting your original crickets from? And then once you have them and your colony is up and running, do not let anybody else in that has been around a different colony. That is your best way of avoiding contamination. The other thing is wherever you're getting your feed and whatever you're feeding them, make sure that is coming from a trusted source, that they don't have any sort of, they're not testing positive for any cricket viruses. And then obviously your water. Make sure that you test your water and make sure that it is up to drinking standards so you aren't having any issues there. The other thing, and I think I maybe covered it in the last one, is if you are on city or rural water, so anything basically but a well, make sure that you are not ending up with chlorine in your water. If you're on city water, if you're on rural water, basically if you're on anything that has been treated in a wastewater plant, it's going to have chlorine in it. Easy way to get around it: put the water in a container, let it sit out and get exposed to the air. The chlorine gas will evaporate and your water is usable. Those are some big tips, big things to look out for. Okay, last question, and so this one came in an email this morning, actually, which thank you for sending it, and thank you for asking, is, and this person is asking specifically for rearing crickets as a supplement for their chickens. So a little bit of context behind this: apparently this person lived, I think, in Florida previously and now has moved to New Mexico in the desert. So Florida, outdoors, free-range chickens, so many insects for them to eat. New Mexico, very dry, not as many insects. She has noticed that the yolks of her eggs are not as high quality. They are not as rich in color. So she wants to rear some crickets to be able to supplement the diet of her chickens. She said she can buy them dead, but the chickens enjoy chasing them. And this is true. So her question was, how many hours per day do I think that she would be devoting on the small scale, raising them for the chickens? And she gave a ballpark of like maybe wanting like 200 crickets per day. So if you are just going to start out small scale, probably start with 1 bin worth of crickets, a couple thousand max, 2 bins if you want. You are going to be less than an hour a day in that small scale. Your time devotion will vary across the life cycle. So when crickets are hatching, you're more labor intensive. When they're in the middle, while they're growing and eating and drinking, pretty hands off. You need to check conditions and check things like food and water, but like it's not a whole lot of time daily. And then when you're going to harvest them, that's where more of your labor comes in. So all in all, like less than an hour a day is what I would guess on small scale. And your chickens will love you for it. And your eggs will be way higher quality. I would say the nutrition profile of the eggs will be higher quality for you consuming them. So I think it's a win-win. But I will tell you what I did tell her, though. If your chickens like mealworms, mealworms might be a better option. And you could actually try to do both. The mealworms tend to be easier to rear. They have a wider array of things that you can give them. I like for food. Food scraps work well, so your cost of feed and stuff will be lower than it would be for crickets because they're just pickier. It just is what it is. So I think if you wanted to figure out a combination of the two of those, that'd be cool. I also am not totally in tune. Like I said, I've never reared mealworms. Maybe it's something I should try. But I don't know what the typical life cycle of a mealworm is. I don't know how long it is from hatch to harvest. They might be faster. They might be slower. I don't know. So I think your chickens will definitely thank you. So that's cool. Thanks for reaching out on that one. And then let me pull up. I know I had 2 Instagram ones this morning when I checked it. So let me see. Bear with me. Okay, I do. So this first one, which is super interesting because it seems like I've gotten a lot of feedback lately. Not all of it's been positive. So this is my friend Joy, and she says, what helps you push past the negative feedback? Part of it is that's fine. People can say what they want. It's easy to sit behind a keyboard and talk crap about somebody is the way I look at it. And then I also say, what kind of a person comes on and trolls somebody who is just a small business and out here trying to do things? It's fine. I mainly with those kind of comments, I just don't even react. But if I look at negative feedback from the consumer, from like at markets, most people have zero filter with me. They come up, they do not shy away from the fact that they think my product is absolutely disgusting. And for whatever reason, they are totally happy to tell me that. Depending on my mood, I get real sassy back, but like in a very playful manner. I'm not ever intentionally mean, let's put it that way. But if they tell me how gross my product is, I have to make sure that I thank them for telling me how gross my product was. Sometimes they feel really awkward and really kind of bad about it. And other times, truthfully, if people are going out of their way to make an effort to tell me that my product is gross, but they've actually physically walked up to my stand, I'm curious. You don't come and walk up and make an effort to tell somebody how gross their product is without like having a follow-up question. So generally that opens up a dialogue. And so I try to keep that mentality. I mean, I know Joy's having a bit of a viral TikTok moment with her spooky Sunday from Halloween. She did an ant Sunday, which was really cool. But so she's getting a lot of negative comments on TikTok. And again, like part of that is keyboard warriors. A lot of those people wouldn't say it to your face. But the people who would say it to your face, like in a market setting, like I said, I would say 50% of those people are actually really curious about why would I eat an insect? Why would I eat crickets? And so, like I said, this is mood dependent. I'm not always super great at being like, oh, maybe this person wants to have a dialogue. But actually, in my experience, the more negative somebody is when they come up to my booth, usually the easier they are to sell crickets to. They come around. They just need a little bit of an education. So I try to approach it. I've tried from the beginning to approach this whole like selling crickets for humans to eat with a lighthearted. I try not to be preachy of like, you should eat these because XYZ. I always do have all of the attributes on the tip of my tongue. So like all of the benefits of eating crickets, the sustainability factors, like those kind of things. I think you should be able to articulate those. But that's not what's going to get everybody over the hump of disgust on eating the crickets. So try to have a wide array of comebacks, if you will, to people being negative. But I also like really try not to take it personally, because generally I think that people don't think about you as much as you think that they do. And sometimes people don't even realize that they are being crappy. And like I said, when I get negative comments on YouTube and things like that, whatever. YouTube's a weird place. People, again, don't have any filter. And it's a lot easier to say some of these things to someone when you're not staring right at them with the threat of being punched or other physical violence. So that's how I deal with negative feedback. Most of the time I don't deal with it. Sometimes I do. And sometimes people are just having problems. They're having a bad day. And, if they want to lash out at me for it, it happens. Okay, the last question I have on here is another one from Instagram, and it is, how do you process your crickets, and does the whole cricket get eaten? So the way that we process crickets, like I talked about earlier, the way that we kill our crickets, we kill them in the freezer. I know in some parts of Southeast Asia, like I said, they will essentially boil them alive, scald them alive. That's actually what happens to silkworm pupa. They scald them alive and get the silk and pull it out. It's a very interesting industry. Check into it. But so we freeze them to kill them, and then we boil them, rinse them, and dehydrate them. So that is the beginning of the process. Once they're dehydrated, then they can either be milled into the powder, which we then put into the bars, or we sell the powder as is, or we season them, roast them, and package them that way. So that's the high level of the processing. And then, does the whole cricket get eaten? It does. The whole cricket gets eaten. So there is no waste on this. So it's not like a cow or pig or chicken where, only 45% of the animal is consumed and the rest of it is either used for other things or thrown away. That's not the case with crickets. You eat the whole thing. You can't digest the whole thing. So the chitin and the exoskeleton, you can't digest. That just that's fiber. Prebiotic fiber is what early studies are showing. So that's pretty cool. But yes, you are eating the whole insect. There is no waste, which is kind of neat. And then really, if you want there to be absolutely no waste, the frass goes really well on your garden or houseplants or compost it. You can use it all, which is pretty awesome. Okay, so let me double check on my Facebook to make sure that nobody dropped any comments in any of my posts there, because some of them were, but we will see if I have any new ones. Bear with me. I'm sorry. So yeah, just the shelf life package. That's the only one I have on that one. Awesome. So we will probably do this again next week. I think I personally like doing it in the morning better. Something about it being light outside. Granted, like today, it's a really gross day, super windy, super gross. But I think we'll keep this in the morning. If you are watching this at a later time and you have any follow-up questions to any of the questions that were answered here, or if you have any questions that you want answered next week, go ahead and drop it in the comments. Really happy to get to it. If you aren't following me on Facebook and Instagram, go ahead and do that too, because I will always put a post there, and you can drop the comments there. Like I said, I always either write them out or print them out so that I have it. And then obviously anybody who is on live and wants to have a question or has a question as it comes up, just drop it in the chat and I'm happy to answer it as well. Hope this was informative and helpful. If you have not checked out all my other videos with a whole bunch of practical advice, how-tos, common questions, common things to look out for, go check those out. I just dropped a really extensive breeding video last night. So go check it out. Thanks for joining. Have a great rest of your Sunday, and we will hopefully see you next week. And like I said, I think I'm going to do 9 a.m. again next Sunday, assuming I don't have anything on Sunday. But anyway, thanks for being here. Have a good one, guys.